Young to Die, which was released in select theaters June 13th, 1986. Now let's talk about that term, select theaters, for a second. That term usually applies to art house films or hoity-toity movies where the certain region's audience wouldn't go see it, so the theater's not going to carry it. But on the other end of the spectrum, that term also applies to movies that are simply terrible, and the theater is not going to waste its time or money or resources to show it. And that usage of the term certainly applies to this movie. This movie is unintentionally totally bonkers. It's all over the place. It's an action film, it's an espionage film, it's a weird film. John Stamos portrays the role of Lance Stargrove, which is a totally unbelievable 80s name. Have you ever met anyone or heard of anyone with that last name? Is it in the phone book? Well, I don't know. It might be worth a look. That's a good idea. Let's all look at our phone books to see if there's any listings for Stargrove. If it's in there, I'm gonna shit. The story goes that Lance Stargrove's father, unbeknownst to everyone, turns out to be a super spy, and he ends up getting killed, and Lance decides to carry on the family tradition and become a super spy himself. Well, he just kind of ends up in that position. Yes, some men are born great, others have greatness thrust upon them. But there's a twist. Stargrove is also a gymnast, which has no bearing on the plot whatsoever. It is a useless bit of backstory that has nothing to do with the movie. And I'm not even sure why it's in there. It just is. Meanwhile, there's this floppy disk that contains a program that has the capability of poisoning the city's water supply. And guess who has it? Gene Simmons! Well, more specifically, a character Gene Simmons portrays in this movie. Yes, Gene Simmons portrays the role of Velvet Van Ragnar, a hermaphrodite gang lord. And trust me, this is the best thing about this movie. Yes, Never Too Young to Die is a shitty film with a very interesting villain. And this character is really the only reason people watch this movie. Gene Simmons did a great job at this. Velvet Van Ragnar is not only a hermaphrodite gang lord, but a hermaphrodite gang lord who's bent on world domination and now holds the city hostage, threatening to poison its water supply with this floppy disk. And it's up to Lance Stargrove to take him down, or take her down, or take him her down. But it's not gonna be easy for Stargrove. Velvet Van Ragnar controls a gang of goons that sort of reminds you of the bad guys from The Road Warrior. This movie is batshit crazy because it's all over the place. It's trying to be a James Bond movie, it's trying to be a Road Warrior ripoff, it's trying to be an action spectacular, and there's gymnastics involved. Why is there gymnastics involved? This movie also stars Vanity. Who the hell is that? Well, you're right to ask. She was a pop singer in the early 80s, a protege of Prince, and leader of the long-forgotten 80s group Vanity 6. And I'm sure we're all better off knowing that. Anyway, she was supposed to be the next big thing, but it just didn't work out, especially when you put her in dog shit like this. Yeah, this movie is terrible. Now, Gene Simmons does a great job in it, and he's really the only redeeming quality about this movie, but it's still a dog shit movie. Now, that's precisely the reason why people love it so much nowadays. This movie is a cult favorite now because it's so terrible. The cast is rather interesting. Aside from John Stamos and Gene Simmons and Vanity, this movie also features Robert Englund and Peter Kwong, the guy who played one of the Storms in Big Trouble in Little China. Oh boy! Knowing that, he must play some kind of martial arts expert, action superstar sensation, right? A character that really livens up the adventure and thickens the plot, right? No. He plays Lance Stargrove's nerdy best friend, whose name is Cliff. So, yeah, Cliff. Right. I've seen this movie a few times, and I enjoy it for the same reason many of you do, because it's so terrible and it's fun to laugh at. Its batshit crazy plotline and structure makes it unintentionally funny and therefore a good time. But what really gets me about this movie is the producers really thought this was going to be a big deal. They were totally convinced this movie was going to be the action movie of the 80s. In fact, this was intended to be an entire film franchise, and the Stargrove character was to be the next 007. And when this movie was first released, it was a big deal. There was tons of promotion for it. Gene Simmons even did press releases and news interviews dressed as Velvet Van Ragnar. The whole thing is just kind of surreal. Anyways, being that this movie is a quote-unquote cult favorite, that must mean the VHS is worth a fortune. Well, it is the common perception that if a VHS is of a cult favorite, it's going to be worth a lot of money. And that sometimes is true, but in this case, it is not true. This was released on VHS in, yes, only once, by Charter Entertainment in 1986, and is rather easy to find with an average price range between $15 and $25. And another thing that really gets me about this movie is that somebody saw this and said, that guy would make a great Uncle Jesse. No, the Uncle Jesse from Full House.